Recently, I was asked a question that I really should have had an answer to, and the fact that I didn't made me so mad. I was at a martial arts event with my sister who was talking to one of our younger teenage students about D&D. As she was describing it, the student was getting more and more excited, so she turned to me and asked, "Hey, where's the best place to start?" It was a little infuriating how I didn't have just a good go-to answer. And because of that, my sister was like, "Hey, sounds like a good topic for a YouTube video." And so, here we are. Hi, I'm John. This is Dragon Mind, where we discover our best selves through gaming. And today we are discussing, if you really don't even have an idea of what TTRPGs are like, how do you even get into them? Let's get into it. Okay, to start, I do want to mention some of my credentials. Even more so than TTRPGs, I've been a professional martial arts instructor for over 10 years. I've worked with students as young as 5, all the way to students into their 70s. And if I were to claim kind of like a universal specialty, it's introducing people that are complete beginners with zero experience into a new interest for the first time. This could be a young child martial arts student, just getting them on the floor and learning how to throw like a proper punch or kick. Or it could be a teenager who's curious about TTRPGs, teaching them what it's like to have a character sheet and add modifiers to a role, or whatever system we're playing at the time. As I mentioned in previous videos, one such person was even my own grandmother, who had zero role-playing experience, but toward the end of her life got really curious about fantasy TTRPGs, so we had started a little D&D campaign that lasted for a few years. Actually, this is going to be my 10-year anniversary in the hobby, and very soon after I had started even being a player, I was actually hired at a family education center to run a D&D program, where my specific job was to introduce completely new players into the space. And actually, most of the players that are still in my casual group today are players I first met or converted into being TTRPG players way back then. And even those I didn't, who already were in the hobby, I've definitely played a major role in their journeys as game masters. So yeah, I hope it's understandable that after having personally converted dozens of players from being absolute newbies into avid fans, I would be a little thrown off by the fact that I didn't have a good answer of where do I get started if I'm interested in TTRPGs. Now again, to be clear, the avatar of the person that I'm speaking about isn't someone that already has a gripped interest. People who are interested are going to do their own research and find a way into the hobby, whether it's watching actual plays or, just buying the books or otherwise perusing forums. Who I'm speaking about is someone that doesn't really have a clear idea of what a TTRPG is. It's someone that if they get it, they would just fall in love with it. But there are a lot of barriers to their understanding, and you want to create as friction-free an on-ramp as possible, because every little extra step of homework is going to be another chance for them to decide that TTRPGs aren't for them. And I think this is where a lot of community members can get really frustrated, because they know how they got interested in TTRPGs, but that isn't necessarily what's going to engage a friend, or in this case, kind of a younger teen. So, for example, like I said, a common recommendation I see is to just watch an actual play, like Critical Role, Dimension 20, fellow Darkmoor podcast community member Advantage. Again though, Critical Role episodes are like 3 hours long. And I gotta admit, I kinda zone out about 7 minutes in. It also doesn't really set the best expectations for what a new game might look like. Again, a lot of these actual plays are highly produced affairs, either in terms of their setup, the skill of the cast, or even just in editing. So as an entry point, it just feels like doing a lot of homework for someone who isn't already bought in. Not even mentioning the fact that, especially for a young teen, someone between maybe the ages of like 12 and 14, a lot of those actual plays have probably inappropriate content that would make me even hesitant to recommend them. Then there's a much better answer, one that unfortunately still has its issues, but Matt Colville recently released a video on TTRPGs as a folk tradition, where he likens it to kind of like basketball, where you may not remember how you learned to play basketball, but it gets passed down through generations as a folk tradition. And I think we're seeing this more and more with things like Stranger Things, just reminding people about TTRPGs. More and more online, I see these testimonials of family members sharing with their kids what it's like to play a TTRPG. I definitely know for this student I'm thinking about in particular, I'm pretty sure their family has played before, so I'm sure they'd be excited to play as well. But again, just ask your family members doesn't feel like a very strong recommendation. Especially with my experience, I find the best way to sell somebody on a hobby or an activity that you know is going to be good for them and you know they're going to love is to give them a salient emotional experience that's really light on the work that they have to do. In the martial arts world, it's as simple as giving them a pad to punch or kick. And I find for TTRPGs, it's literally just get a dice, start to tell a story. If there's a moment where they could succeed or could fail, have them roll the die, make up a percentage of success in your head, and then narrate based off the result. When I worked for that family education center, I remember going to an expo event where that's literally what I did. I just had a single D20 on me. As people would come up, in order to get like a free water bottle or whatever, they would have to play a mini adventure with me. And all I would say is, okay, you're in a room with a dragon, and the dragon is chained to the floor. What do you do? And some of them would ask me rules. Well, do I have anything like a sword on me? Do I have the ability to cast spells? And a lot of it was just simple improv, yes and or no but. And I got a lot of really cool answers from a wide range of people. I had an 8-year-old girl want to befriend the dragon and destroy the chains and ride it out of the castle. I had an older woman, maybe someone that could have been a grandmother, say she casts an invisibility spell to sneak by the dragon. Of course, I had, young 12-year-old boy want to fight the dragon. But these were like 3-minute little interactions that gave them a taste of the fun of TTRPGs without making them print out character sheets or research rules or watch hour-and-a-half long actual plays. So it doesn't have to be something too big. Now, I will say, when it comes to introducing someone completely new to TTRPGs, and I know a lot of you who may come across this video may groan when I say it, D&D is the one that's most likely to hook them right off the bat, and then you can have them kind of move toward other specific systems after. As much as maybe you don't like Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro, or you just know there's this perfect game that you love that you want to share, the fact of the matter is D&D is the most recognizable TTRPG brand. While other TTRPGs like Daggerheart, Pathfinder, Drawsteel are competing in the TTRPG space, Dungeons & Dragons, as a brand, they're trying to compete with other major entertainment IPs, not just the little niche of TTRPGs. Playing a role-playing game by itself is already really hard for a lot of people to imagine or visualize. So when you add additional elements that distance their understanding by more and more stages, it becomes even harder to sell them on the idea of the game that you're finding fun. Like it or not, D&D has appeared in all sorts of media, from actual plays, to comic books, to kind of just nerdy subculture, to mainstream network shows. So there are a lot of different ways that potentially interested community members could kind of absorb what D&D is like, which is why it's easier for them to start comprehending what role-playing is like. Again, likening it to a martial arts example, I find that most students that start either want some sort of physical health, they want a stronger mind or emotional well-being, or they want to just be able to defend themselves. Trying to sell them on this 16th century samurai style that was used very specifically for when a knife was thrown at you at a 30-degree angle, those technical specs are most likely going to dissuade them rather than invite them. In other words, one of the worst ways to sell a potentially interested new player is by using all sorts of technical jargon, like talking about the difference between a 2d12 system versus a 2d6 roll high system versus a d20 roll under system. The technical parts should support the emotional engagement. And if you start getting too excited and talking about them too early, a lot of times you end up losing the player rather than converting them. And for the industry and the hobby as a whole to flourish, we really need at least just as many people coming in than there are leaving. And while the industry is at the healthiest that I think it's ever been at, given research I've had into the history, again, not having lived through the 80s or 90s or any of those periods, the reality is that D&D is still the most recognizable and the one that people can point to and go, oh yeah, I kinda get what it's about. Now, like Matt Colville said, the most success I've personally had in converting non-players into TTRPG fans is by running the game myself. However, the aspect of the question that stumped me is how can they get into it if I'm not involved? And to be honest, the resource that I've found is like the most solidly designed and the easiest for players to pick up, and the one I've heard the most positive practical feedback about is Peril in Pinebrook, a free 22-page PDF that you can get for free right off of D&D Beyond. I am not sponsored, I'm not trying to sell anything. One of the reasons I like this thing is because it's free, but what I like about it is that it has a contained story that has a pretty predictable runtime. Peril in Pinebrook shouldn't take longer than 90 minutes. A lot of the core D&D mechanics that complicate things are stripped away, and it comes with these nice, easy-to-use pre-made characters. Now, I have a friend who actually ran this herself for a group of completely new players. She was initially a little nervous that the game was going to be too simple. But as many rules-light GMs will attest to, sometimes when you strip away a lot of the complicated mechanics, it frees you up to be more involved in the story. The story is the part that creates the engagement, and by having less mechanics, let's say the student wanted to try being the GM for the first time, they have a lot less to kind of manage and remember. They just have to look at the little stat block, roll the d20, do a little bit of math, and take it from there. Now, of course, some, I don't know, passionate community members, let's call them, have a lot of criticisms for Peril in Pinebrook. A lot of it has to do with the fact that it's a linear adventure, which may create the expectation that D&D should be railroading. But again, the goal we're trying to accomplish is to give this student or their players, but again, our goal is to give this student and their players a kind of lick the spoon experience that gives them a sense of what role-playing is like before they dive deeper into all the different branches that it could go. So yeah, if you're completely new and you're just kind of looking up TTRPGs, I think Peril in Pinebrook is a great place to start, at least to decide if TTRPGs are for you, or if you just don't have time for that. So now I want to hear what all of you have to say. What's been your experience introducing new players to the hobby? Were they already pre-warmed and they were excited to play? Or had they not really been sold on it yet and you had to figure out how to create that on-ramp to get them excited? How old were they, and how many new players were you dealing with? Was it just one new player in a group of veterans? Was it a completely new group? And are there specific products or adventures or whatever that you found have been particularly effective at introducing new players to the hobby if they weren't already bought in? Let me know in the comments down below. Just a little forewarning, I may be willing to argue in the comments. I don't know yet. If you are interested in exploring different TTRPGs, in the description of this video are links to playtest materials for my TTRPG, Swiftguard. It's a 5e adjacent system. It uses a lot of the same scaffolding, but completely rewrites the action economy and character creation process into creating a game that, in my experience, runs a lot smoother. I would love to know your thoughts either in the comments of this video or in the Swiftguard community Discord, which is also linked in the description. Have an awesome day, and remember, your story matters. Bye-bye now.